But our minds can do that. Especially at my experience, especially before taking rest, right? My problem may be this big. It's a problem. I haven't paid a bill and now there's a late fee. And by the, 10 minutes later, I'm out on the street without any money, begging, ek rupya, it's gone from this big, to this big. So that our minds, can perpetuate some bad habits. Another one we had here, similarly, getting stuck or panicked by unfounded fears and worries. Mark Twain once said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, so many terrible things have happened in my life. Luckily, most of them never took place. Right? So, we tend to, worry about, this could happen. It's the... Is that for me? Hare Krishna. Can you get that out of the way then, so I don't trip?
Yeah.
It's kind of a what if syndrome. Well, what if this happens and what if that happens, right? So these are the kind of habits that our mind, bad habits that can perpetuate in our mind. Srila Prabhupada writes in the first canto of the Bhagavatam that the mental diseases in Kali Yuga are worse than the physical ones. Non-devotees even have they have a saying for it. They call it stinking thinking. Okay? And there's even 1%, one study says that 83% of the average person's thought are repetitive and useless. Right? You just go, like a hamster on one of those wheels, just going, and our mind goes. No one's ever had that experience here, though, right? It's non-devotees, it's not us. Blaming and chastising ourselves. Right? Sometimes we're our own worst critics, and there's nothing wrong in the fourth canto of the Bhagavatam, I believe. Srila Prabhupada says that a sincere soul immediately regrets when they make a mistake, but there's a difference between a regret and then getting on with life and kind of narcissistic neurosis where we just beat ourselves up. And what often happens is, let's say we have some fall down or some difficulty, and then we lament, and then we're meditating on that fall down, and then dhyato visaya pungsang sanghasteshu vijayate. We do it again because we're meditating on it. So there's a fine line between, feeling some sincere regret and then getting on with our devotional service. Yeah, we take no questions anytime. Pastor Dave?
So you're talking about a guilt trip. No, okay. If you are,
Guilt trip is what my mother did to me.
Oh yeah, that's right. But to give ourselves a auto guilt trip.
Yes.
Well, isn't that also, couldn't it be seen as a way God has to force us to deal with something instead of just dwelling on it?
Yes, there's healthy ways and unhealthy ways. There's healthy habits that we can do with our shortcomings, and there's unhealthy habits, and that's what we're going to talk about more in the. Yeah, to rectify, sure. Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I'll give you a post-dated check on the rest of that. Any other comments so far? Okay. And here's a big one. Engaging in unhealthy behaviors to escape life's stresses. Okay, because this is, people turn to alcohol, they turn to drugs, they turn to pornography, they turn to so many things because those things will tend to temporarily, seemingly lessen the stresses in our mind. Or the number one perhaps, shopping. Right? When the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. Right? But different ways that different habits, and we may have different ones besides those that I've mentioned. We all have our different ways of dealing with. Some people just take rest, or food is another one, right? But different ways, often unhealthy ways of dealing with life stresses. So, how to deal with these habits, how to cultivate good ones, and how to get rid of bad ones. So let's start briefly with a philosophical understanding that we are pleasure-seeking by nature. What's the verse from Vedanta Sutra? Thank you. Ananda Mayo Yasat. Very good. That that's what we do. We're into having a good time. Right? That's the very nature of the soul. And how do we define pleasure is interesting. We'll define it differently. Right? For example, some devotees in India will define it as a loki sabji. Anyone know the vegetable loki? It's my least favorite vegetable. I can't stand loki sabji. So for me, I don't define that as pleasurable. If you're from Gujarat and you give me dokali with some ghee on it, that's enjoyment. But basically, based on our identity, based on who we think we are, we'll define pleasure. It's all, Prabhupada often gives the example of the hog. Right? They define pleasure in a way that anyone in this room would think is totally ridiculous. Right? But it's because he thinks he's a hog, or he or she thinks they're a hog, they think that's pleasurable. So the false ego, we will define pleasure based on our identity. And then the mind, which is what we're dealing so much talking about habits, the mind's job is to protect the false ego. Whoever we think we are, the mind rejects things that don't give pleasure to our identity, or our definition of pleasure based on our identity, and accepts things that do give us pleasure based on who we think we are. So the mind is actually a simple person, a simple element. Right? It's just accepting and rejecting. Sankalpa, vikalpa, or another place Prabhupada talks about para avara. It's either transcendental or mundane. Right? Krishna says also in the Gita, udarat atmanatmanas, natmanas avasadya, atmaivahyatmano bandur, atmaiva viparatmanaha. The mind can be either our vipur or our bandur, our friend. So that's just a small point about that. Now I need the pens. So now we're going to describe something called, I hope you can see this little flip chart here for all the way in the back. I'll try to write big letters. The habit loop. Okay, and there's 3 parts to this habit loop. We're going to test you at the end, so see if you can remember 3 things. Okay. There's a cue. There is, where's my memory? Thank you. How'd you know? And what's the last one? Reward, very good. A+. So, what's another name for a cue? Someone help me in English, because someone it's not an English first language may not. Signal, trigger, yeah, good. Okay, so it's that thing that kind of conjures up a thought. And that goes, and from the cue, we perform a routine. And by performing the routine, we get a reward. And because of that reward, we do it again. And if you do this enough times, it becomes a habit. So you might want to, here's a simple way I like to think of this habit. It reminds me of in Washington, D.C., we have a pathway to the temple. Nice little pebbles, and it's kind of pretty, and you're supposed to walk down that, right? But from the parking lot, there's a quicker way. And so at one time there was kind of tall grass, but people just started walking on it, walking on it, walking on it. Now it's as much a path as real path. So we create, as we continually go through this cycle and perform the habit is really in the routine. It just becomes almost second nature. Raise your hand if you've ever driven to some place in a car that you've driven there many times before. You don't even remember turning left, turning right, signaling, turning on the car. You're just, oh, you're there. Anyone ever have that experience? Because it's become a habit. It's just something that you do. And we need habits, right? If we woke up in the morning and we said, okay, I'm supposed to brush my teeth, I better Google brushing teeth and find out how to do it, right? That we need, habits are very helpful. Like we said, 45% of our life is based on them. But let's go through each one of these for a second. So the cue can be almost anything that reminds us of something. It can be a song, right? You look in the movies. I'm sure none of you have watched any since you've been devotees, but if you can go that far back in your memory, right? They'll sometimes, a romantic thing. They'll remember the time they first met and what song was playing, right? And then when they hear that song again, it conjures up a memory. Right? For me, I was in my last exam at the university, my very last exam, and I was just going to join the ashram after that. And while I'm taking my last English exam, I could hear the kirtan. The devotees were chanting down on the street. Badrinayan Prabhu and a bunch of devotees were chanting. And whenever I hear that tune, I remember that last exam and wanting to just finish it really quickly and go join the kirtan. So that can be a cue or a trigger, an emotion, a time of day, right? Oh, it's the evening time. I just put in a full day of service. It's the evening time. That can be a cue. Okay, turn on the computer and go all over the planet on the internet and just kind of space out for a while. Nobody's ever had that experience here, I'm sure. But it's that can be a cue though, the time of day. And we know that the time of day is also influenced by the different modes of material nature. Association, right? When we're with a certain kind of friend, we're kind of frivolous. We're with so-and-so Maharaj, we're kind of serious, right? We'll be very much affected. That association can act like a cue. There's a saying, anyone here speak Portuguese? Isn't there a saying in Portuguese that it kind of goes, tell me who you associate with, I'll tell you who you are? Can you say it in Portuguese? Exactly. Just what I was thinking. So association, is so important. So so many things can a cue can be, when you wake up in the morning. Right? What you do after eating a big meal. Okay, so there can be good cues and there can be bad cues. I was attending a seminar in America recently by Braja Bihari Dasa. She's here now. I think she is teaching one of the ILS presentations. And one of her cues is that she puts right next to her bed a picture of her Guru Maharaj, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and a picture of Srila Prabhupada. And the first thing she sees in the morning is that picture. So that's a cue, and then the routine is she starts feeling gratitude. Okay, so there could be all kinds of different cues. How are we doing? Okay. Any question on cues? So then let's go to the routine. The routine is the actual habit itself. It becomes second nature after some time. And you were all saying what were some good habits and some bad habits. Those are the routines. Eating late at night, chanting excellent japa, right? All the different things that we become habitual, that's the routine. I took out this quote from Srila Prabhupada's books. It's actually describing Vaidhi sadhana bhakti versus Raganuga sadhana bhakti, but you can see how it could be applied to habits. In the beginning, one is trained according to the principles of regulation, right? Habitual. under the guidance of the acharya or spiritual master, and gradually when one is elevated, devotional service becomes automatic and spontaneous eagerness to serve Krishna. Okay. So again, something becomes habitual enough, it becomes, we could use the word spontaneous. You just naturally do it. And then the rewards, see, not everything becomes a habit. There has to be some pleasure in it. You have to get something out of it, at least in the beginning. Anyone here remember when you were in school studying Pavlov's dogs? Yeah? Yes? You want to explain it? Remember the experiment?
Basically, the scientist Pavlov, he came up with, he did a whole experiment where he would ring a bell and right away give the dog a biscuit. And if he did it enough times, he got the dog to memorize or realize that whenever he hears that ring, it means that I'm going to get a biscuit. So he would actually just ring a bell and he would notice that the dog would start to salivate right away. So the dog was able to make a connection between the ringing of the bell and the reward that he was going to get.
And so eventually what he did was he stopped giving the biscuit and the dog would still salivate. So at least in the beginning there has to be some pleasure. Right? I once asked my mother, I said, why do you, because she smoked 2 packs of cigarettes every day. And she still lived to 80-something years old. And she passed away in Vrindavan, so lucky lady. But she said, well, you know, it used to be a lot of really fun and it was very social. We'd get together with friends. Now I don't even know why I do it. You know, I was asking her when she was in her 60s. But at least in the beginning, because remember we said we're, what was it? Ananda Mayo Vyasat. We're pleasure seeking by nature, so there has to be, at least in the beginning, some reward, perverted or spiritual. And that's why I quote this verse here. It's such an important verse when we're, well, I'll get to that in a second actually. So at least in the beginning there needs to be a reward. And then the cycle continues. Okay. Any questions on the habit loop? Yes?
Sometimes it seems that there can be
Take a hike.
there can be even without a cue there can be some habits. I mean, like it doesn't really have to be anything that you know, it could be just idleness. Someone is idle, so something might creep up even without a cue. Does it necessarily have to be with a cue?
I'd have to think about that more. Generally speaking, at least the way it's presented in the literature, that there's a cue, and then the cycle begins. The cue is idleness, according to Vasudeva Prabhu. Yes. Okay. So now, what are we going to do about this? It seems like you know, this is, you know, we got this this groove in our mind, you know, and we've maybe been doing some bad habits. Maybe we've been chanting our rounds kind of for 10 years now. So how are we going to break out of that? Right? Or whatever, you know, habit. Does anyone here have any bad habits that you'd like to improve? Okay, just a few of you. Okay. So again, let's start philosophically. Okay, and then we'll go from philosophical down to very, very practical. Is that all right? Okay. Let's start philosophical. I always think, you know, this is just a general principle that I've gathered over the years, that when we think something in Krishna, you know, when we think Krishna consciously, we sometimes have a choice of thinking philosophically or very practically. I think it's good to start philosophically and then work your way down, but it has to be practical in the end. But if you start with practical, sometimes you never get to philosophical. I had a professor once who said it's okay to have your head in the clouds as long as your feet are on the ground. So that kind of combination is good. So a really important verse for this is Yehi Sangsparsa Jabhoga Dukkha Yonaya Evate. Krishna says that when you combine the senses with the sense objects, misery is born, which is totally redefining what pleasure is, because most of the world thinks pleasure is combining the senses with the sense objects. So Krishna's totally redefining it in that verse. Right? Or Srila Prabhupada would sometimes talk about shreyas and prayas. What do those two words mean? Long-term benefit and short-term benefit, right? And so the prayas, yes, it's so nice to connect the senses with the sense objects. And shreyas is, no, let me think. If I don't do that, if I take shelter of Krishna, I'm going to go to the spiritual world in my next life. Or, so thinking of shreyas and prayas, thinking, I'm not these habits. I'm meant for Krishna's pleasure. So trying to bring the philosophy and Krishna's words into not only our mind, but down into our heart. Okay? And then, next step, really working hard to get a higher taste. And even more than working hard is praying hard. What's that saying that we should pray as if everything depends on God, and we should work as if everything depends on us. So that combination. And so in terms of habit forming and this idea of pleasure seeking, the key verse is chapter 2, verse 59 of the Gita. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasi dehinam rasarvarjam rasopyasya param dristva. Higher taste. Param dristva nivartate. So the only verse and purport I'm going to read is this one. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects still remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada writes, unless one is transcendently situated, it is not possible to cease from sense enjoyment. The process of restriction from sense enjoyment by rules and regulations is something like restricting a diseased person from certain types of edible. The patient, however, neither likes such restrictions nor loses his taste for the edibles. We have a doctor here, is that true? Yes, he confirms. One who has tasted the beauty of the Supreme Lord Krishna in the course of his advancement in Krishna consciousness no longer has a taste for dead material things. Therefore, restrictions are there for the less intelligent neophytes like Brajabihari in spiritual advancement of life, but such restrictions are only good until one actually has a taste for Krishna consciousness. When one is actually Krishna conscious, he automatically loses his taste for pale things. So yes, this is if we have a real taste for Krishna consciousness, material enjoyment just like doesn't compute. It's like what it conjures in my mind is when I first moved to India about 24 years ago. I used to travel sometimes, and we would go second class, which is everyone brings out their tiffins and they start eating, and mostly in North India everyone speaks Hindi, and I didn't understand a word of Hindi in those days. I still don't understand too many words after 25 years. There's a reason for that though, right? You know that? If you speak 3 languages, you're trilingual. If you speak 2 languages, you're bilingual. And if you speak 1 language, you're American. So people would be talking in Hindi, and for me it was actually great. I could just read the Bhagavatam or chant, because for me it was just like white noise. I didn't understand anything. So I kind of think like that's, if you have a higher taste, you see people doing things in the material world, and you just wonder, I couldn't understand. Why would someone want to do that? Right? It's kind of the difference between vairagya and viraktir. The word vairagya is used differently in different places by Srila Prabhupada. The general idea is that vairagya is kind of what's mentioned in this purport. Keeping a distance between the senses and the sense objects. The word viraktir indicates indifference. They just like It's a more advanced stage, that you're just indifferent to material pleasures. You're not forcing yourself to, but you're just indifferent. Okay. So that's wonderful. What happens though if we're not necessarily that strong? So that's the next one. And by the way, any questions or comments on that? Yes. What's that? Vairagya is what Srila Prabhupada is discussing in this purport, is kind of keeping the, or as Krishna says, restricting the sense, the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, so keeping a distance from sense enjoyment. And now we're going to talk about that, because the next one, if you look on your list, you see it's all, I don't know if you noticed that we're kind of following what you have in your handout, if you can read that small type. Avoiding the cues. So a good first step is thinking about what are the cues that get me to perform that bad habit. Okay? And avoiding them. If you have a television in your bedroom, for example, if you're a grihasta, I know brahmacharis, it's not an issue. I hope not. It's not a, it's not a good idea. It's one of the worst things is trying to take rest just after watching the Idiot Box or having your computer, whatever. At least move it out of the bed or move it out of your house. If you keep in your your refrigerator or whatever, food that isn't so healthy for you. Replace it, replace those fried things with, almonds and cashews and, dried fruit, things that are actually healthy. So if you're going to snack, the cue is you see all that tasty things, you start salivating like Pavlov's dogs, and instead, though, at least the routine is you eat something healthy. So all different things, kind of things like that. I have a habit that when I drive pretty much, if there's no traffic, 25 minutes to downtown DC and back to the temple every day. So I have so the cue is getting in the car, and the routine used to be listening to the radio and the news. Not rock and roll, but the news. And finding out about the weather and what happened in Syria and Ukraine and all that sort of stuff. And so what I tried to do is I got, I put in it's an older car, put in the car a, good sound system and downloaded, 150 lectures of Srila Prabhupada's and bhajans and things. And so all I have to do is press one, because it's so easy to turn on the radio, right? Easy, right? So I try to make it just as easy to listen to a lecture. Or kirtan or whatever, and so so the same cue. The reward was kind of relaxing and listening to something enjoyable or interesting while driving. So I just changed the routine. So instead of getting to downtown DC and knowing what's going on in the world, I got downtown DC now and know what's going on in the spiritual world. It's quite a difference I can see on my consciousness. So other things about avoiding cues. Here's a good one I think for devotees, is to have a really, at least generally speaking, the idea of the rule of threes. That if you're never be in a secluded place with a member of the opposite sex who's not your spouse. Right, so I know, for example, in Vrindavan, in my house, I live downstairs, and Burijan Prabhu lives upstairs, and often ladies want to go see him, so he always says, at least, bring someone else with you, and if they don't, he asks me or my wife to go up with that woman, the Mataji, to see him, and he's very, very strict about that. So again, it's not that necessarily anything, but you just be respectful of the illusory energy in that way, and just avoid any possibility of those cues leading to a bad routine. The next one, getting help from others. Can you think of anything in the Shastra where people change their habits by association with a devotee? Magrari, the hunter, yes? Anyone else? Jagai and Mada. You guys are reading this, cheating. Any? Who? Valmiki? Is that who you said? Okay, thank you. What else? Anyone else? Ajamil? Rahugana, yes. Narada himself. And then what about all of us? Yes. Kratu Prabhu, in his humility, is saying me. But, we became devotees. It's not like for me, the Bhagavad Gita just kind of dropped out of the sky and it was in my hand. We became devotees often by the association of other devotees. So, if we want to change a habit, it's really helpful to get someone to help us. Right? If you're a brahmachari living in the ashram and you're staying in the same room and you have a habit of staying up a little late at night, you tell your other roommate, no, I want to take rest by 9. Please, if you see me not doing that, please remind me of the habit I'm trying to form. It's easy between husband and wife because husbands like to get on the case of their wives and wives especially like to get on the case of their husbands, and so it's easy. No. But that was supposed to be funny. I'll tell you when to laugh in the rest of the seminar. But the idea seriously is that people that we can help each other. In Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a 12-step program to curb one's alcoholic addictions, and I think it's the 4th step is that you have to tell at least one other living person about your challenges. And I know it's hard sometimes as devotees. One of my roles, I told you, I'm an ombudsman for ISKCON, and an ombudsman takes a vow of confidentiality. Whatever anyone tells me, I never tell anyone else without their permission, at least when I'm in that role as an ombudsman. So when people know that, they'll often come to me, say, yes, I'm struggling with one of these regulated principles, or I'm doing this, and I say, well, have you told anyone? And they'll often say, the culture in our society is that I'm just afraid if I told someone, they'll tell somebody else, and it's going to be the talk of the yatra, and it'll be very embarrassing. Get on Facebook, right? So you do obviously have to find a person you do trust, but one of the most powerful ways to improve a habit, to get a new one, get rid of an old one, is to have someone help us with that. Anything on that? Okay. Then doing something in a group, like for example, if exercising is something. When I give presentations, especially when I used to live in India, I used to give a lot of presentations in corporations, and I would ask the people this question, and it's a question we could all ask ourselves. What are 1 or 2 things? I usually said 2 things that you're either not doing now or you're not doing well, that if you did do them well and regularly would have the biggest positive impact on your life. What do you think devotees generally answer? Chanting, improving their chanting, and what's the other one? Yes, more reading of Prabhupada's books. And then what do you think, at least in India, when I ask, what do you think non-devotees generally say? More, yes, Prabhuji got it right. Brahmachari is thinking like a grihasta. No, I'm joking. He said, more time at home. Right? That they don't spend enough time with their families. And the other one is exercise. Well, like this, right? So if you wanted to exercise, you might join a group of people who exercise. It's much easier sometimes. If you want to do some service, we have, I think, 7 or 8 Namhatta groups in, maybe Kantaya Prabhu knows better than me, in Washington, D.C. And so generally each week, that group takes a turn cooking the Sunday feast. So they do it as a group. So they might not, I don't have time, I'm so busy to go to the temple. No, my group is cooking this week. Right? So that can be very helpful. The next one is probably should have been the first one, is asking Krishna for help. He says, one of my favorite verses, Ananyas chintayanto mam, ye jana payupasate, tesham nitya vijuktanam, yoga shembam ahamyaham. That Krishna, when we're devoted to him, he preserves what we have, he carries what we lack. Oh, you use Ayinanda Tanuja, very good. You're more advanced than me, you're quite more advanced. Krishna will help us. There's a nice meditation on Krishna, to think of him in two ways and combine those two ways. That Krishna is all-powerful and he's Bhaktavatsal. What does Bhaktavatsal mean? He likes to dear to the devotees. In some places, I believe it said that that's his most prominent feature even, right? Bhaktavatsal. So it's such a nice combination. Because if God is all-powerful but not all-loving, if he gets in a bad mood, in America they say has a bad hair day, could be a problem. And if he's all-loving but not all-powerful, nice person but can't do much to help us. But that combination is quite a meditation, isn't it? Krishna's all-loving, and he's inclined to his devotees, and he's all-powerful. He can even help us change and improve upon a habit that we've had for a long, long time. So asking for his help is very good. Number 7, I already discussed, implementing a healthier routine to yield the same reward. That if you can perform something regularly for 60 days, you've created a new habit. General thing. Okay, so you make that determination, that brat, right? To either change this habit or start this new habit. 60 days is generally a good amount of time that you'll have that new habit. And here's a very important one: start small. Don't say, "Okay, I heard that seminar, and now I'm really fired up. I'm going to get up at 2:30 in the morning. I'm going to chant all my rounds for Mangalarti. I'm not going to eat any more sweets except one piece of burfi on Sunday. I'm going to, right? And then you do that for about 2 days, and then, 15 pieces of burfi, and sleep until 9 o'clock, right? Right? So that, in the Gita, I think it's 14 times in the last 6 chapters, Srila Prabhupada uses the word gradual or gradually. So start small, baby steps, and start with something easy. Just like in Bhakti Shastri, we usually start with the Nectar of Instruction. It's only 11 verses. So then they finish that book quickly. They feel like, oh, we're making some progress, right? So, start with something small. Maybe getting up 10 minutes earlier, or whatever, but Hindi, what do they say? Dhire, just, slow and steady, and take up another challenge. Not all at once. And then my favorite verse in the Bhagavatam. We may slip sometimes. We may take a vow, and we have some challenge. So here, in the 11th canto, having awakened faith in narrations of my glories, being disgusted with all material activities, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. Even though he is sometimes engaged in sense enjoyment, my devotee knows that all sense gratification leads to a miserable result, and he sincerely repents such activities. So don't beat yourself up. We learn from Nectar of Instruction. There's no prayaschitta in Krishna consciousness. You don't have to perform all kinds of rituals and this, that. Pick yourself up, and as the Frank Sinatra, pick yourself up and get back in the race. That's life, as he once sang, right? So you just, you stumble 99 times, but you pick yourself up 100 times. Right? So that's our mood. We just, the Rupa Goswami makes it very clear. You just get back and engage in devotional service. So you may have some, whatever habit you're trying to change, there may be some shortcoming. Don't lament and, oh my God, I was really doing well and now I'm lower than the worm and stool. I'm lower than the stool and the worm. I'm just so fallen. Oh my God. That just becomes really, mode of ignorance. I'm just going to take rest. Any thoughts on that? Well, you're really asking a lot of questions, audience, today. Remove temptations. Lord Chaitanya said that, right? He said, Nadanam, Najanam, Nasundarim. So again, keeping that distance between us and sense objects. Here's one that isn't on your list. It's often easy to connect a new habit to something that you do every day. Right? So, for example, if you have breakfast every day, and let's say it's something simple, like you sometimes forget to take your medicine or your vitamin supplements. So you link it to breakfast. Breakfast, supplements. Or, whatever. Finish your day of sankirtan, immediately open up Prabhupada's books. You link it to something that you do regularly. That makes it much easier to cultivate a habit. Okay? And here's an important one. You may want to write it down. Srila Prabhupada once wrote to Satsvarupa Maharaj, I'm just quoting one part of the letter, where he said, realization means you should write, every one of you. What is your realization? So keeping a journal actually even a journal of improving habits can be something really powerful. Only caveat to that is protect your journal. You don't want it to end up on Facebook. Password protected if it's on a computer. Hide it someplace if it's on a piece of, if you're going to really be honest in your journal, be careful about it. Right? But seriously, writing something down does help with the commitment. By the way, I was thinking of one thing about that when I said start with small things, because what we're doing is we're kind of cultivating our willpower muscle, and the more you kind of exercise it, the bigger the muscle becomes. I don't have many muscles left right now, but you get the idea. And here's a really good one for us. How many of you here live in Mayapur? Okay, well this next one doesn't count for you guys, sorry. And that is that it's often easiest to change a habit when you're away from your routine. Right? When you come to the holy dham or go somewhere else, you're away from that, this kind of rat race that you may have gotten yourself into. Right? So you're away from the routine, you're in a new situation. It's easy to start a new habit and to continue it once you go back to your where you're accustomed to. So I have one last point. But before I do that, I'll take some questions and comments. Vasudev?
You were saying write your realization. Another one I find really works well is you tell a friend that you're going to do this, and then you ask him to check on you a month later. Otherwise, he'll forget to remind you.
Better than friend, enemy. Because if hey, you are not doing. So
tell your enemies, even though all of you follow Prahlad Maharaj and you have no enemies, you're all, you don't think in terms of friends and enemies. Or you're like Yudhishthira Maharaj, whose enemy was never born. But I get your point, yes. Someone who will be critical. No, you have no enemy. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Yes, Prabhu, you want to just say it loudly and I'll repeat it? Or is that Maharaj? Sorry, Maharaj. Not staying alone is a good one, yes. That's right. Or if is sometimes just surrounding ourselves with yes people. That just say whatever you say, yeah. Or, but being with people who might be a little critical of us. Thank you, Maharaj. Yes, Prabhu. Many times we feel we have this habit, I cannot overcome it. I don't have the strength. But yes, so we think that Krishna will give us the strength, but we don't necessarily realize that. There's this that's mentioned in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita and also in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's writings. The word is called Hridaya Durbalya, right? The weakness of heart. You ever have this? You know what's right, you know what's wrong, and you choose the wrong one. Right? You don't have enough of that, whatever spiritual shakti, or just the mode of ignorance is taken over, and you know what's right, you know what's wrong, and you choose the wrong one. Sometimes that's called like a weakness of heart.
Next time.
Yeah, next time, Bagme. Right, next time, right. Yeah, starting tomorrow, I am not going to eat any more sweets, but where's that cheesecake, Prabhu? Right? Yeah. Yes, Prabhu. What about sincerely repenting? We talked about that we just have to be, one of the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu talks about the 6 symptoms of surrender. Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam. To accept everything favorable and reject everything unfavorable. So in that 4th canto purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about how repentance can be favorable. That a sincere soul feels some repentance. But if we dwell on it too much, that same thing that was at one time favorable, I think my experience, can become unfavorable. We dwell on it instead of dwelling on Krishna. So we have to be a little careful about that. Best thing is pick ourselves up and get back into Krishna consciousness. But not think that, oh, it's okay, no problem, Klai Bhagde, I had this problem, but just like the 7th offense against the holy name, or using the holy name like a floor mat to wipe away our nonsense. Yes, Sandini Mataji. Anyone translate that into English?
Teenagers tend to be rebellious. Yeah, so when you have children, the teenager, they are very rebellious. How to correct their habits?
By the way, the person who asked that question, Sandini Mataji, is a stalwart preacher in our temple in Beijing. What do you do with teenagers when you want to try to correct their habits and they're very stubborn? You wait until they're 20. That's my experience. No, don't repeat that to my son. He's not. I'm going to get in trouble now. Well, it's a long question, and it's a different seminar. Briefly, Chanakya talks about that after someone is 16, you befriend them. That doesn't mean you give them the keys to the car and the debit card and like that. But it does. My experience is they often have to be convinced intellectually. You can't. They don't just because Pita said, Mata said, therefore you do. Their intelligence is more awakened, and they have to understand why. That's a brief. Did someone translate for that for Sandini? Okay, good. Okay, so the last point. The only caution, the only question I could think of about all of this about habits is something Rupa Goswami talks about, niyamagraha, right? So you can sometimes go through the motions. You can, nice kurta, tilak, eat bag, schnick, schnickety, right, and go to Mangalati every day. But you're full of pride, thinking, oh, I'm so much better than those other guys who get up late and walking around like that. And you don't have the heart of a Vaishnava. And you're not doing those activities to make spiritual advancement you're doing it almost to check off a box. Okay, Mangalarti, check. You know this? Check. So we can have good. So we have to be careful not to be proud of any good habits we may have. And as Srila Prabhupada, he quotes that saying that the pauper is proud of his penny, right? So you can be proud of anything, you know. I just walked across without stepping over the cables. Right. So that's the thing I think we have to be careful when we're developing good habits. Is one of the good habits is also to always be connecting our heart and be remembering Krishna, and doing this as a service to our spiritual master and to the Lord. So keeping that devotional, smartavya satatam Vishnu vismartavya najatuchit, always remembering Krishna, never forgetting him. So doing it in the right mood, because we can sometimes just become proud of our habits, and then pride cometh before the fall. Is it not? So, Prabhus, I wish you all the best in changing whatever habits you may want to change. And thank you very much for coming, and please accept my most humble obeisances, Prabhus. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.